when I'm working with a new material that I've never worked with before. I guess I'd go back to the theory, how do you know it's going to work unless you try it? I consider myself maybe an inventor, maybe a designer craftsman, but I don't consider myself an artist. What I hope for my viewer is they look at my work as just a visual feast. I test every rug, usually with a party. I see spaces as a great inspiration. I see a blank wall and I just know what I want to put on it. Hi, I'm Gloria Crouse. I'm a fiber artist, but my #1 passion is rug hooking. I think this pillow pretty well illustrates just a few of the materials I use and some of the different types of techniques. This actually isn't rug hooking per se, but it's an extension of rug hooking, the traditional type. I'd rather refer to this probably as rug hooking variations. I still use the traditional yarns to the mohairs, to the bouclés, the novelty yarns, and the different plied yarns, the cones, and yardage that I cut into strips, like the traditional methods, only I probably incorporate a lot of different types of materials that normally aren't used. There's very few things that I don't use. Now these materials will be cut using my cloth stripper, which I'll show you shortly, which will produce all these wonderful strips. Velour, synthetics, cotton materials, just about anything. Along with that, I use a lot of metallics because I love the reflective qualities those get. I use wing nuts, bolts, to some things I pick up, I don't even know what they are. They're just interesting in color and texture. Up here we have the gift wraps, threads and cones of yarns. I love adding the monofilament. Synthetic raffia, gift ribbon, ordinary ribbon. If you're a fiber nut like I am and you love color and texture, you'll absolutely love this work. You can put in anything and everything together into endless varieties. Let me show you just a few of the techniques I use. Now before you cut all this precious material up, make certain that you make a small test to see if it's going to hook or not. And I usually just cut 1 or 2 inches, and by pulling, you can see how that easily that comes apart. This wouldn't work, so you can't use a bias cut. You'd probably cut this piece of material on the straight. Now with the rug stripper here, I have many different wheels, cutting wheels that it comes with. This one's 1/4 inch, and I usually use from 1/4 inch on down. I'll show you how easily and beautifully this cuts. It'll cut in anywhere from 3 to 4 different very precise cuts, and you can go as fast as you want, but you can see what beautiful strips this will cut. Now that was a straight cut, but let me show you an amazing thing I discovered. This is a suede cloth, and look what happens when you pull the suede cloth. You have here a regular cut, and pull it, and you'll end up with this beautiful rounded cord which has very smooth edges and adds a whole new texture to your work. And now that'll work with terry cloth. A stretched terry cloth will give you a whole different look than a non-stretched. Velours work beautifully. Here you have a nice straight even cut, which is fine in itself, but if this is pulled, you have a whole new cord that adds another new effect. The secret to any of this pull technique is it must be cut on the cross grain. Otherwise it won't work. Now you'll end up with all kinds of very short strips. Let me show you the greatest technique to solve that problem. I use an adhesive which glues the strips together, and you can make as long a strip as you want and eliminate that frustration of threading your needles. Now this is such a simple procedure, and with my fingers I'm giving it a good press for only about 2 or 3 seconds. Now this adhesive will take completely overnight to dry, but you can start hooking immediately. Now for the majority of my work I use these 2 simple needles, the speed needle, or the hand needle it's called, and the punch needle. The punch needle comes with 2 points, a small point for finer yarns and the larger point for the heavier yarns or the heavy wool strips. This needle is shown with about 10 different slots. Each one of them will give you a longer stitch. It's set now in the shortest stitch, and it's easily threaded by first going through that outside ring. You want to keep it in this slot so you kind of guide it on through, coming out the pointed end, and then by pulling back and forth you'll make sure you have that cloth or the yarn completely in that slot, and now it's ready to hook. Now for a small frame like this, I like to just bring it over close to my lap. I'm using the punch needle, and it's set in the shortest loop with the large point, and on the backing I'm going in every hole. Now let's see what it looks like on the right side. Now let's see what it looks like in every other hole. Now you can see where this is a much different look than the first. Now let's see what it looks like with a longer loop. To change the length of the loop, I'll move this locking spring out of the way, and each one of these will make it longer. So let's try a number 5, which is an intermediate one. And I'll go now in every other hole again. Knowing it's going to be a longer loop, I don't want it too tight. Now let's see what's happening on the right side. Now you can see how much longer my loop has gotten already. This is only halfway as long as I could make it. Now I'll change it to the longest stitch, which is a number 1, push my slide lock down to hold, and you can see my needle has just gotten longer. You'll get about half that length in the finished loop, but all I've done is extend that needle out longer to make a longer loop. Now I'm pushing in much farther, and I will end up with a long loop that comes in half as long as that protruding needle. Now with the punch needle you can go in any direction, but the needle and the point have to be headed in the direction you're going with the groove straight up. Now if I go you can go this way. It's a bit awkward. I usually like, instead of turning my hand like that, I'd much rather turn the entire small frame around and go from right to left. Now let me show you how to use the speed needle. Now the yarn will go through the first little ring on the end. And then I usually use an upholster pin or some sort of a pin to push this on through. You can use this wire if you like. This has settings for 5 different lengths. This again runs from about 1/8 of an inch in the shortest setting here on up to about 1 inch in the longest setting here. And it's ready to go. Now with the speed needle, it's much easier to turn corners. You simply leave the point of the needle in, turn, and at all times you want plenty of excess yarn so it's not hung up on the corners or you won't get even loops. A lot of times I will even use my left hand to turn. Now I can come towards me, and it's just as easy to use my left hand to do this turning as it is the right hand. Now when you get off like that, you can see how easy it is to pull back. If I wanted to stay on that straight line and continue in a straight line, let's turn it over and see what's happening on the right side. You can see what uniform stitches this makes. I might add at this point, my tack strip is covered, which you can't see, but if I pull this off, you'll see the tack stripping I use, which holds the backing on just beautifully tight. This is just tack stripping that carpeting companies use to lay wall-to-wall carpet. See how I can pull even tighter, and the little tacks will grab that backing material and hold it absolutely as tight as possible. Now I have just changed from the shortest stitches to the longest length that's possible. Okay, let's look now and see what a long loop this has given us. Now I still find I use the punch needle quite a bit, but for the majority of the work I like the speed needle. It goes much faster and it accepts far more materials than any other tool I could possibly use. Now before I get into showing you two major projects, I'd like to show you how I finish these works when they're completed. I leave it on the frame exactly as is. I have the entire back all clipped so it's ready to be latex. And that's just a very thick substance that goes on very nicely. I squeeze quite a large gob of it on. And I love these little plastic knives. And for most work, I just take it right to the edge like that, not on into the hemming. This latex will lock in the stitch. It'll also make your rug anti-skid. Spread this around so that it completely covers all the stitches, securing them well. I'd suggest having an open window because this really has quite an odor and you might be a little bit sensitive to it. Now, once that is all covered and completed, I'm using a dilute white glue, which will act as a nice sizing. And when that's dry, that will give you a nice even edge to hem. Let it dry overnight. The next day, take it off the frame, and you'll find how easy it is to do the final hemming. Now with this piece, I'm doing a long runner. It will be about 8.5 feet high, and it'll be as wide as you see, which is about 36 inches. I've thrown in here and there a few sculptured higher areas, but for the most part, this will stay pretty flat. I'm thinking of durability, so the stitches will be very close together. In this case, it's going to be practically all wool. The design is basically taken after just a mental version of a little piece that I've sketched on a paper like this, but it's enough to remind me of where I might want to go. Now on this type of a design, which is just one border after another, I always start at the bottom, like right down here, and complete each section at a time. And I don't really decide what color I'm going to add on that next section until I get to it. I know it's going to be a kind of tongue-in-cheek, fun animal design, so my animals will predominate. Down here I have horizontal animals, here I have rounds, and I decided it was time for something curved, so it ended up being snakes. I know I want giraffes in here somewhere just because I think they might be fun to do, even though I can't draw well. I didn't sketch in any diagonal. By the time I got to this stage, it started looking a little bit boring, so this sort of broke the trend of all these horizontal borders. In here you'll see where I've added, I hang on colors when I've made a decision. I know I'm going to be putting in a little bit more green. I want to introduce yellow. I'll look over the overall design, think I haven't had very much yellow and it's sort of demanding it. So this is in here to remind me when I get somewhere in here to try and find some place to add yellow. This is going to be just a fun tongue-in-cheek sort of a design, and in fact I think I'll probably name it the Wild Queendom, which will keep a lighthearted feel to the entire thing. You have seen the right side of the work, but you work on the wrong side, so let's go to the other side and see how some of these techniques are done. Now I usually do all the outlining at one time so I don't have to continually change color and rethread the needle. And when I get to the end like that, I'll hold it there with the scissors, pull out so I don't lose the loop, clip as close to the surface as possible. And if I'm using the same color, I'll then put it immediately in and continue on like with this row, which will be going straight across. And I'm using the speed needle every chance I can get just because it's so much faster than the punch needle. And I eliminate using a different color and threading so often. Now on the finished side, you can see what even loops the speed needle makes. It's now set in the lowest setting, giving you the shortest loop. This is a horizontal fill-in. If I wanted, I could follow the outline, making a total different texture on the other side. Now here you can see when I reach the outline, I go right over it. And as you can see on the right side, that line will still show. You don't have to be an artist to draw these simple figures. I very often use this stencil method, which is about as simple as you can get. I'll show you how simple a stencil can be used. You'll notice I've cut 2 leaves so I can line up with the last one I've just drawn. I've got the bottom cut so that it's going to be in perfect line with the row I'm drawing. And using a permanent pen, I will draw in my leaf form and then move it on to the next. Now these are the simplest of all forms to use. I just draw on a piece of paper something that looks about the right size and shape, cut it out, put it on quite a lightweight piece of cardboard, draw around it, remove the paper drawing, and take your razor knife and simply cut around the outlined edge. As far as where I get my ideas, I look for animals in every source I can. I had this in the studio, this elephant that was fairly good to use. I love the animal crackers. I had those by accident and really like this little guy better than I do the bigger elephant. And at first I thought I'd be able to use these wonderful cows, but then I decided I'd keep it all in a jungle theme. The leaf form repeated again. Remember, repetition is a very powerful design tool, and you can see how simple it is and how easy it works on something like this. Now I usually like using this punch needle with the smaller point. I have it in now for the yarn. Anytime I want to get into close confined areas like these in here, this is the small one, and it also comes with a large point, which is used for either wool strips, heavy wool strips like this, or for the very heavy rug yarns. Now at this point I'm going to start in with some of these wool strips using this heavier needle. On the large needle it's kind of heavy, so it wants to be sometimes wiggled to get in, but that becomes very easy to do after you get a little bit done. I'll now check to see if I like the length of the loop, the color of the material. You'll notice on this it's kind of a zigzag look. That's because it's in every hole. Maybe I'll decide I want it in every other hole, which will give a much smoother look. Now I will be trying several of these yardage strips. I have a few here and I don't know if I'll use them all. At least they'll be here available to try when I want to. On over here you can see how I select the colors. These will range from sort of the soft gray muted ones on to the quite vivid bright ones. I like them right close at hand so I can quickly pick up one and test it and see if it's the right color. And I undoubtedly won't use all of them, but at least they're right here selected, ready to use. The main thing, I want the entire piece to be very rich and lively. Now this is more of a typical way that I work, where I've started with my full-scale cartoon. I'm going to follow the outside outline exactly, but those inside diagonals, they'll be questionable. They're just an indication again of showing diagonal lines that I'll be wanting to follow. This will be a wall hanging, which is not going to be a rug, so I can have the freedom of putting anything and everything in here. Like I'll take a blue like this, and the yarn is compatible with the various blue print fabrics, and I love to mix the prints with the colors. I'm staying mostly with all these pastels. Now I sort of like those two together, so I'll probably use a combination of many lavenders. Looks like I need some pink up there, and I see where I'm going to be needing some yellow. I'll be using quite a lot of these very reflective, shiny materials in this. This may look a little garish and too much at this point, but I'll only be using very small amounts. So they'll work very well when you see them in very small lines. Not so often I'll just keep throwing in colors. And I can almost tell before seeing that that isn't going to work, but I'll throw it in and try it anyhow, and immediately I see it doesn't work. So I'll take it out, and looking around at the rest of them, most of them look like they're pretty compatible. I just don't like that too well. That's a little on the dingy dark side, so I'll take that out and not use that. All this didn't start with this design. I started with my usual small sketch. Now my first sketches were very rough. This is done with a ruler, so it's starting to look pretty accurate, but I really didn't like the overall look of it. It looked pretty staid and boring. So you can see where I've started cutting out little corners, and I like that real well. Now once I get this to the stage where I really like it, then I transfer it to my full-scale cartoon. From there it is put on the backing using the exact measurements, and this is about the way it looks after 2 or 3 weeks work. Of course you're looking at the right side of this, so I can show you the texture and the design. And I have the general outline, and I have made my diagonal marks. But the difference with this one is compared to the last one you saw, this will be very dimensional. So here I have to consider as part of the design the highs and the lows. Here you'll see I have a very solid high area. Now I will concentrate on balancing this off, like with a fairly medium shag here that's halfway high. Over here I will be adding a high probably in this purple, and I've marked it H here. And over here you can see where I've used the blue raffia in a medium height. I've carried it out with a lower blue, similar but different here. And that's sort of what the whole thing is using similar colors but different, or in different techniques, or in different levels. This background will be covered with probably something like this medium-high shag, maybe farther spaced, and all those little things will be cut off. In here I've got, I'll probably leave these as a painted ground, which will emphasize the highs and the lows. In here I have a combination of many different greens. It's interesting how you can see where a dull green next to a very bright green will blend together and work as one color. Now in this area I'll probably use this pink satin, which is one of my favorite materials to use. I've listed it as a low area. The shine of that will be very nice with this pink area. Again, similar but different. This is one of my very favorite techniques, and it's so simple to do. These come out, as you can see, very easily because they're not latexed in. But I wanted you to see the background. Now I use a combination of as many similar blues as I can here, all different prints. It seems like the more variety used, the better the overall effect is, rather than just one shade. And this is so simply done. They're pinked. They don't have to be, but these are pinked in about 3-inch squares. And I use a chopstick, which works just beautifully for doing this. And it's a matter of just putting it in the center and poking it in that background. But you can see how quickly it's done. Once I've finished the entire frame, then these in back will be surrounded with adhesive. This is a tacky glue. Any flexible glue will work. Now you see I'm surrounding the whole little nose that sticks out. And once the entire piece is completed, I will be using latex, which will further ensure that I have a good bond and a secure hold. Now this is the beginning of a sculpted shape. Now as I finish one row, I will move this screw into this next hole, which will give me a longer loop. And I will be working towards the center now, making each row just slightly higher than the previous row. This way I'm building the shape in, actually. I'm now putting it on what I call the number 3 hole, and I'll continue in the same fashion, going all the way around my square. I won't change from now on. I'll leave the loop setting at a number 3, because as I get towards the center, the height will be building up automatically because you're working in such a dense area. But I'm putting as much yarn packed, mostly in this center area, as possible, going over and over until I see it's almost taking a concave appearance. See how it's dipped in like that? Then you know it's packed in probably as much as you'll need. You'll notice I'm using the large scissors to take off all these high irregular loops. As I go right next to that, the foundation and these edges, I'm being very careful that I don't get the point of the scissors going through to cut that backing. I give it a couple of taps to let the excess yarn fall down on the plastic so it doesn't get in my previous work. You'll notice as I clip, I'm not taking much off. Now I'll transfer back and forth from the large scissors to the small scissors, digging out those loops until this starts in taking shape. It's not secure as far as latex, but I can still get in and dig these loops up without pulling them out completely. I'm being careful that I'm not pulling too hard. If I did, the entire thing would come out. And I'll trim these down so they're semi-done, about like this one. And this one, of course, will be done. In between, I plan on adding paint to keep a definite, very flat, low level, and possibly running some threads on through. Now, this is about as many of the purple or the lavender squares I'll be using. And I will be vacuuming up all this excess that doesn't shake off from time to time. In this section, I'm going to be using another variation of the fabric shag. These are much looser and smaller strips than before. And on my background, all I've concentrated on is adding a color that's similar, covering my backing material. Now on the background of this, I've used combined 4 strands that will be treated as one when I use the speed hook. And this is a great spot to use things that you normally find too fine for anything else. I've used several different shades of pink, some light, dark, and I've thrown in a little bit of lavender for contrast. And then for highlights, I found this gift ribbon worked real well. I just cut off the ends and it cuts so nicely and it tears, bing, 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 and just rip it. And it always rips straight because it's a synthetic. And that will add just enough of the reflective highlights that I like to perk up this section. The actual technique is simple. I use a crochet hook. This one happens to be a number 1, and it's just a matter of pulling the little cut strips, which are already cut to size. I do all that originally. I pull one side through on one side, go around, pull the other one through on the other side. If I were working in the center of this, where I couldn't reach on both sides, I use 2 crochet hooks. I do poke all one through from one side, and then I'll walk around and pull the second side through from the other side. Now earlier I had mentioned my use of metals, and I'd just like to show you a couple of typical techniques so you'll know how it's done. Eyelets are one thing I use a lot of, and they're very easy to apply. The main thing is measuring accurately so you know where you want them. And don't cut the material like most of the directions say. Open up the material instead with any type of a protruding pointed object like that. Take your hammer and the little eyelet tool that comes with it, give it a wrap, and it's done. Now for washers, I have an area here where I've started to apply them. I have used a dab of white latex glue in the center to camouflage the backing, which I didn't like. And I will now add adhesive to the back of each of those washers, spread it around evenly, place it carefully inside that hooked area. Being careful not to get the adhesive, we'll pretend there's adhesive on there, but being careful not to get the adhesive on any of the yarn. When all that is filled and completed, I will have to weight it down securely. Now that's the most important thing with any of this metal and fiber work, is the pressure is what holds it securely. So I'll put a piece of paper just to keep my fiber clean. Place any type of an object that'll work, like this piece of wood that'll fit there, and a very heavy iron. I'm using my iron, but a few telephone books or magazines would work just beautifully. And then leave it there to dry overnight. And when you're through, these will be on so securely that you can't even prick them off with your fingernail. They'll stay on beautifully as long as they have pressure and they can stay overnight to glue. Now anytime I'm using something as large as this washer, I would first coat it completely with my adhesive and use any type of a form that would fit to hold it down securely. And I'd have all kinds of them together, put your books or your magazines over them, and let it dry overnight, and you'd have a wonderful bond. Another fun technique to use is the use of springs. Now these are very easy to do. Put your metal rod in a vise, twirl your wire around, and it would go on like that, and push it together, pull it off, and if you want it looser, just pull on it. If you want it curved, you can curve it. And then it's simply screwed into your material just for about 1/4 of an inch. Use latex on the back or a good adhesive and they'll hold beautifully. Now these were such a good idea, it suggested doing the same thing in fiber. So here I have made what I call these little curls. Now this is a real fun thing to do. Just take your dilute glue, dip it in, saturate it good. Maybe squeeze a little bit of excess out. Use a clippy to hold the end. And then it's just a matter of twirling it on until I finish the whole thing. Put a clippy at the end, place it over a raised edge to dry, and when it's dry, take off your clippies and slide it off and apply it to the fabric just like you would any of your fabric shags, and you have a very interesting new texture. It's nice to be surrounded by so many of my pieces, and I'm hoping some of them might inspire you to just start right in hooking. You may not want to tackle a huge rug or a wall hanging, but a good place to start might be on something like these pillows. You've seen this one already. How about a smaller pillow with less work? This one I particularly wanted to show you. I made this ages ago, very heavy in sculpture, which makes the colors especially rich, but I particularly want to show you the back. I've used a very low loop, and it's very fast. This would make a great upholstery technique. Now back here I have two parts of a floor rug. They can be joined together to look like one rug or else separated, giving you many different sizes and proportions. It's basically wool, high shag and low, but I've thrown in a lot of the copper metallic for highlighting. In here you'll see some of the black mylar, just to sort of perk it up a little bit. Now over on this wall I have a piece that isn't even a fiber piece. It's made of all metal, and this is made using fiber techniques. You can see the mylar shag at the bottom and a lot of my nuts and bolts and washers, but it's sort of a companion piece with this white one back here. They're the same size, and the white one's typical of many of my monotones, where I've thrown all the different textures of whites and in different levels. Some of the background is painted. I've even added a few little painted tubes. These are just fun projects to explore to the fullest all the textures you want to try. Now this is one part of this 4-part piece wall hanging that averages about 8 feet high by about 8.5 feet wide. This is probably my favorite section. In this one I've used some of my favorite copper springs. Here are a couple along with the metallic fabric. This was a wonderful copper ribbon. It's actually metal. It looks like fabric, but it's metal. And I've thrown it in with a whole mixture of rich shags, a little bit of this kind of a yucky background, just enough to be a subtle color change. This one's fun, using the large washers, and the texture in the center is some of the caulking compound and then gilded. On back to the purple, which uses some of my favorite metals that have been adhered on with adhesive. Maybe you can see the copper name that I've even used wire to incorporate the name. This is that tie technique I use so much. These are just cut colors from a stripe material that are poked in, tied on, that just make kind of a nice soft, almost a shag, but very, very subtly. Over here I have a similar thing, only very heavy. The difference with this one is on each side of these ties, it's a different color, and you kind of can't see it until you move them back and forth. And on down to another 2-part rug. This is one part and there's the other part, but I want to show you something really fun and interesting with this. You know, when you spend 2 to 3 months on a piece, you get a lot of ideas, and I'd worked with Velcro so much. Just watch what happens when I pull these off. Now you can add any color you want just by plopping on another square, and you have a whole new color scheme. Now not all the squares come off. I've tested it. At first I thought, will this really hold or won't it? But you give it a good press and it holds beautifully. I've vacuumed it, I've walked on it, and when it's flat, you absolutely can't detect that it isn't hooked right in there to begin with. Now I want to show you some wearables that I've enjoyed making. This is just a t-shirt that I've applied a lot of those different colored stripes that have been cut off, sewn on with machine stitching. I've started to do a lot more beading, and I think incorporating different techniques together with this is marvelous. Over here I have a jacket that is very heavily sculptured, and I've even added some of those metal washers. And even to a tie. I love ties. This happened to be a commercial tie that I just added my own embellishment. This is crystal beading again, but probably of all of them, this is really the fancy one, where I've added sculpture, and you can see how well it adapts itself to all the different sequins and beads. Now, I have some new and some antique beads, some that aren't even beads, ornamental embellishments on it. But look at the fringe. Isn't that swish and nice? You can imagine what fun a piece like this would be to wear. The back is burlap that's been quilted, which gives it a very nice stiffness and a wearable quality that normally it wouldn't have. This is a carpet bag, and it's all lined in wonderful suede, using sort of a low sculpted idea. But of all the things I've made, probably the most fun have been my shoes. I've wanted to make shoes for years, and I've finally done it. These are my sculptured shoes with a little bit of beading in them. And after a long day of hooking, you can imagine how wonderful they feel. I hope in saying all these things and watching this video that I've inspired you to try maybe just a part of this. You'll see what wonderful fun it is. You can go as glamorous as you want, as large as you want, or as small as you want. I've enjoyed it for years, and I hope you will too.